We're leaving, right now." Daniel Carter didn't ask. He crossed the crowded cafe, reached down, and yanked the chair out from under Olivia Bennett, then closed his fingers around her wrist like she was something he'd misplaced and come back to collect. Not the way a man reaches for someone he missed, the way a man reaches for property. And Olivia, the strong woman Ethan Miller thought he knew, went silent, small, afraid. Right there at the little corner table where weeks earlier, a stranger had looked at Ethan and said 4 words that changed everything. "You can stay." Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask you something simple. If this story means anything to you tonight, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because it changes in ways you will not see coming. And leave a comment telling me the name of the city where you're watching from right now, so I can see just how far this little story has traveled. Now let me take you back to the very beginning, to the morning before any of this happened, to a man who had spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. Ethan Miller was 35 years old, and for most of his life, he had believed that keeping things small was the safest way to survive. He would have told you that himself plainly without shame, as if it were a fact about the weather. Small life, small risks, small hopes. That way he used to think there was never very far to fall. He had learned that lesson the hard way. He had buried his father 2 winters earlier, standing at the edge of a cold grave with his hands stuffed in his coat pockets, because he didn't trust them to stay still. And somewhere in that same stretch of gray years, a relationship he thought would last his whole life had simply faded out, not with a fight, not with slammed doors, but with silence. One day they were talking, then they were not. Then she was gone, and the quiet she left behind moved into the apartment like a second tenant who never paid rent and never left. So Ethan did what a lot of men do when they don't know how to grieve out loud. He packed up his life in Seattle, loaded it into a truck, and drove until he hit a city that didn't know his name, Austin, Texas, a place with no history attached to him, no streets that reminded him of anyone. He told himself it was a fresh start. Deep down, he knew he had just carried the same loneliness to a warmer climate. He worked from home managing projects for a construction company, which meant he could go entire days speaking to no one but the delivery driver and his dog. He had a small apartment. He had a loyal old dog named Cooper who followed him from room to room. He had 2 or 3 friends who checked in once a month. And he had a routine, and that routine was the thing that held him together. Every single morning, Ethan walked 4 blocks to a little neighborhood coffee shop called the Willow Corner. Same time, same seat, same coffee. A small table near the window tucked into a quiet corner where no one bothered him, and he bothered no one. It wasn't much, but it was his. It was the one part of his day that felt like it belonged to him and not to the past. "Morning, Ethan," the young man behind the counter would say. The usual, Ethan would answer. And that was the whole conversation most days. That was as social as he got. He liked it that way, or at least he had convinced himself he did, which for a man like Ethan was nearly the same thing. Then came a rainy Friday morning that broke his routine wide open, though he had no way of knowing it at the time. He walked in soaked to the shoulders, shaking the water off his jacket, and the first thing he noticed was that the place was packed. Every table was full, and worse than that, his table, his corner, his one small piece of the world was taken. 2 college students sat there with their laptops open, papers everywhere, completely unaware that they had claimed sacred ground. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, honestly unsure what to do with himself. It's a strange thing about routine. When you build your whole sense of steadiness on one small ritual, and that ritual is suddenly gone, you feel it in your chest like a missed step on the stairs. He almost turned around and left. That would have been the Ethan Miller thing to do. Retreat, go home, try again tomorrow. Don't make a scene, don't take a risk, don't be a bother to anyone. But it was raining hard, and Cooper was already fed and asleep, and something in him just did not want to walk back out into that cold. So he scanned the room instead. That's when he saw it. A small table in the far corner with a single empty chair across from a jacket and a closed notebook. No coffee cup, no bag, no person. Just a jacket draped over a chair and a notebook sitting closed on the table, as if whoever had been there was long gone. Ethan waited. He watched that table for a full minute, maybe two, telling himself that if someone came back, he'd move along. Nobody came. The jacket didn't move. The notebook didn't move. And a man dripping rainwater in a crowded cafe can only stand there for so long before he starts to feel foolish. So he made a decision, and for a man who avoided decisions the way other people avoid the dentist, it felt enormous. He walked over and he sat down. He remembers thinking in that moment that it was probably fine. People leave jackets behind all the time. People forget notebooks. Whoever had been sitting here had clearly given up their seat. He was wrong about that. He was about to be very, very wrong. He had barely settled in, barely lifted his coffee to his mouth, when a voice spoke from just behind his shoulder. "That's an interesting choice." Ethan turned, and there she was. A woman somewhere around 30, holding a fresh cup of coffee in both hands, shoulder-length brown hair, warm eyes that seemed to take in the whole situation in a single glance. She wasn't dressed to be noticed. A simple cream sweater jeans, nothing that announced itself. And yet there was something about the way she stood there, calm, steady, unbothered, that made her impossible to look away from. Ethan felt his stomach drop straight through the floor. He shot up out of the chair so fast he nearly knocked it over. "I am so sorry," he said, the words tumbling out of him. "I thought there was a jacket in the notebook and I thought you had left. I didn't mean I'll move. I'm sorry." She didn't say anything right away. She just watched him fumble, one eyebrow slightly raised the corner of her mouth, doing something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "You thought I left," she said. Yes, I thought the seat looked empty, and I've been standing there for 10 minutes and it's pouring outside and my table got taken and I just—" He stopped. He took a breath. "I sound insane. I'm going to stop talking now." And here's the thing that Ethan could never fully explain afterward, not to his friends, not to himself. She should have been annoyed. She had every right to be. A stranger had walked up and taken her seat while her back was turned. That's the kind of thing that ruins a person's morning. Instead, she looked at the empty chair beside him. Then she looked back at him, and she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "You can stay," she said. The empty chair was starting to feel personal. Ethan laughed. He didn't decide to laugh. It just came out of him, surprised and real, the kind of laugh he hadn't heard from himself in longer than he could remember. "I'm sorry it was starting to feel what—" "Personal," she repeated, sliding into the seat across from him like it was the most natural thing in the world. You sit at the same table alone long enough, an empty chair starts to look like an opinion about you. She set her coffee down. "So, you might as well sit in it." He should have made an excuse. He should have thanked her and slipped back into the crowd and found somewhere else to hide. Every instinct he had, every wall he had spent 2 years building was screaming at him to get out before this became something. He sat back down. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Olivia," she answered. "Olivia Bennett. And now you owe me a conversation because you scared me half to death sneaking into my table." "I did not sneak. You absolutely snuck. There was a jacket. A reasonable man could conclude the table was abandoned. A reasonable man would have asked. I didn't want to bother anyone." And that answer, small as it was, seemed to catch her attention in a way he didn't expect. She tilted her head slightly, studying him, and for a second the teasing left her voice. "You didn't want to bother anyone," she repeated slowly. "You say that like it's a whole way of living." Ethan opened his mouth to respond and found he had nothing. Because she was right, and she had figured it out in about 90 seconds, and no one had said it to his face in years. He looked down at his coffee. "It's kept me out of trouble," he said finally. "Has it?" she said. It wasn't really a question. They sat there in a silence that should have been awkward, and somehow wasn't. Outside, the rain kept coming down. Inside, the cafe was warm and loud and full of strangers, and none of them knew that at one small corner table, two people who had spent a very long time being alone had just accidentally stopped being alone for the length of a cup of coffee. Ethan thought that would be the end of it. One strange, pleasant morning, a story he might tell someone later if he ever talked to anyone. He fully expected to finish his coffee, thank her, and walk out into the rain and never see her again. He couldn't have been more wrong, because the next morning when he walked into the willow corner at his usual time, telling himself he was only there for the coffee, she was already there. Same corner, same table, and this time there were 2 cups waiting. She looked up when the bell over the door rang, saw him standing there frozen in the doorway, and gestured at the empty chair across from her. "You're late," she said. "We didn't have a time," Ethan said. "We have a time now. It's whenever I get here before you." She pushed the second cup an inch toward his side of the table. "Cinnamon in yours today. You look like you needed something warmer than plain coffee. Sit." I sat. And that, more than the wrong table, more than the rain, more than any single dramatic thing, was the real beginning. Because a person can survive one accidental morning. It's the second morning that gets you. The second morning means it wasn't an accident. The second morning means someone chose to be there again. They fell into something neither of them named. Some mornings they talked for hours about everything and nothing about music and cities and the strange small disappointments of getting older. Some mornings they barely spoke at all. She would open her notebook and sketch, and he would answer emails on his phone, and they would simply share the table in a quiet that felt like company instead of loneliness. He started noticing things about her. He couldn't help it. When she was stressed, she ordered her coffee with cinnamon, and she'd wrap both hands around the cup like she was trying to warm something deeper than her fingers. When she was excited about an idea, she talked faster, and her hands started moving through the air like she was drawing the thing right there in front of him. And she started noticing things about him, too. She caught it early, and she called it out one morning without any warning at all. "You do a thing," she said mid-conversation out of nowhere. "I do a lot of things." "When you get nervous, you tap your fingers on the table. Right now, actually," she pointed. "Right now you're doing it." Ethan looked down and realized to his complete embarrassment that she was right. His fingers were drumming a quiet rhythm against the wood. He stopped. "See, now I've made you self-conscious," she said, grinning. "I love that. You're a menace. I'm observant. There's a difference." She leaned back, satisfied. "Most people never look at anybody long enough to notice anything. I've had a lot of practice being the one who watches." There was something underneath that sentence. Ethan heard it. But he didn't push because he wasn't the kind of man who pushed, and because he understood better than most that some doors only open when you stop trying the handle. Instead, he asked her about her work, and her whole face changed. Olivia Bennett was a freelance interior designer. She had spent years in New York building a career one long, exhausting project at a time, making other people's homes and offices beautiful. She was good at it. She was more than good at it. But when she talked about those years, there was a tiredness that crept into her voice, the kind that doesn't come from working hard. The kind that comes from working hard on the wrong things for the wrong people for too long. "I spent a decade making sure everyone else was comfortable," she said one morning, turning her cup slowly on the table. "Comfortable homes, comfortable clients, comfortable everybody." She looked up. "You want to know something stupid? I don't think I ever once stopped to make sure I was comfortable. Not once." "That's not stupid," Ethan said. "It's a little stupid." "It's a little sad," he said. "That's different." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're honest. I didn't expect that. Most people you say something like that, they rush to fix it. They say, 'Oh no, I'm sure that's not true. You did great, blah, blah, blah. You just—'" She paused. "You just let it be true." "Would it help if I lied to you?" "No," she said. "God, no. I've had enough of that to last a lifetime." And there it was again. That shadow. That thing behind her words. Ethan filed it away and didn't ask. But he wondered. Of course he wondered. Because a woman like Olivia, warm and sharp and impossible to look away from, does not end up spending years making herself small for other people by accident. Somebody had trained her to do that. Somebody had taught her one disappointment at a time that her own comfort came last. And Ethan, who knew a thing or two about carrying old wounds into new cities, could feel the shape of it even before he knew the story. The weeks went on. Fall turned colder, and slowly, without either of them saying so out loud, that corner table stopped being a coffee shop table and started being something closer to a home. A place they both returned to not out of habit, but out of hope. Ethan would wake up in the morning and feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A small, unfamiliar lift in his chest, and it took him weeks to recognize it as looking forward to something. Then one morning she told him about the chair. They were sitting there, coffees between them, and Ethan made an offhand joke about the second chair at their table, the one nobody ever used, the one that sat empty on the end. "You know," he said, "for a woman who called an empty chair personal, you've got a spare one at your own table you never fill." He meant it lightly. He watched the joke land wrong the second it left his mouth. Olivia went still, her hands wrapped around her cup, and she looked at that empty chair for a long, long moment before she said anything. "That's Claire's chair," she said quietly. "Who's Claire?" "My sister, my older sister." She kept her eyes on the chair. We used to meet here every Friday morning, right here at this table, for years." She swallowed. "We'd talk about everything. Dreams we were too scared to say out loud to anyone else. Fears. The stuff you can only say to someone who's known you your whole life and loves you anyway." Ethan didn't say anything. He had learned by now that when Olivia went somewhere painful, the kindest thing he could do was stay quiet and stay present. "6 months ago she got a job offer," Olivia went on. "Big one, across the country, the kind of chance you don't turn down." Her voice caught just barely, so she took it. And she should have. I told her to take it. I was happy for her. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were shining. "But every Friday since then I've come here and sat at this table, and I've left that chair empty, because filling it felt like admitting she was really gone. Filling it felt like closing the door on a whole part of my life." Ethan felt something turn over in his chest, because he knew that feeling. He knew it in his bones. "I get it," he said softly. "I do. I really do. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be nice." He leaned forward. "Olivia, I moved 1,700 miles to get away from a life that ended. New city, new everything. And I still catch myself living like I never left. I set 2 coffee cups out sometimes. Force of habit. I still do it. 2 years later." He shook his head. "You keep coming back to that chair because leaving it feels like giving up on her. I get on planes to nowhere in my own head every single day. We're not so different. We're just running in different directions." Olivia stared at him. And for the first time since he'd met her, that steady, watchful woman looked completely defenselessly surprised. "How do you do that?" she said. "Do what? See straight through a person like that. You barely know me." "I know you enough," Ethan said. And then, because he wasn't a man who said things like that and had already terrified himself, he grabbed his coffee and took a long drink just to have something to do with his hands. Olivia noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. "You're tapping again," she said gently. He was. They both looked at his hand and then at each other, and something passed between them in that little corner of that little cafe that neither of them was brave enough to name yet. But it was there. It had been there for weeks. 2 people who had spent years perfecting the art of being alone had, through nothing more than a wrong table and a rainy morning and the stubborn refusal to stop showing up, become the most important part of each other's day. Ethan should have been happy. Part of him was. But there was another part, an older part, a scarred and careful part that felt the ground shifting under his feet and did not like it one bit. Because Ethan Miller knew exactly what this was. He knew what it meant to look forward to seeing someone. He knew what it meant to notice the way she held her cup and the way her voice changed when she was tired. He knew what it meant to feel his whole day rise or fall on whether a certain someone smiled at him across a table. It meant he was starting to care. And caring in Ethan's experience was just the beginning of the part where you lose them. He didn't say any of that. He just finished his coffee and told her he'd see her tomorrow, and walked out into the cold with his heart doing something it hadn't done in 2 years, and his mind already quietly, carefully looking for the exits. That should have been the whole story. 2 lonely people finding a little light in each other over morning coffee. If the world were kind, that's where it would have stayed. But a few mornings later, the bell over the door rang, and Ethan looked up from his cup expecting to see Olivia, and instead he saw a stranger. A tall man in an expensive coat, the kind of man who walks into a room already certain it belongs to him. He stopped just inside the door and scanned the cafe slowly, and when his eyes landed on their corner table on Olivia, they stopped, and something cold and satisfied crossed his face. Ethan watched Olivia lift her head to see who had come in, and he watched the entire woman he had come to know disappear. The steadiness left her shoulders, the warmth left her eyes. The confident, teasing, watchful Olivia Bennett folded up and vanished right in front of him, and in her place sat someone smaller, someone careful, someone bracing for a blow she'd learned a long time ago to expect. "Olivia," the man said, and his voice was smooth as glass. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Ethan looked at her. Her hands had gone still around her cup. Her knuckles were white. And in a voice barely above a whisper, not to the man but to herself, or maybe to Ethan, or maybe to no one at all, Olivia said one word. "Daniel." Daniel Carter crossed the cafe like he owned the floorboards. He didn't hurry. Men like Daniel never hurried, because hurrying meant you were worried someone might leave before you got what you came for, and Daniel had never once in his life worried about that. "You look good," he said, stopping at their table. He didn't so much as glance at Ethan. It was as if Ethan were a coat rack. Better than the last time I saw you. Austin agrees with you. Olivia didn't answer. Her hand stayed wrapped around her cup, white at the knuckles. Ethan watched her try to find her voice and fail. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Daniel asked, and there was a softness in it that Ethan didn't trust for a second. It was the softness of a man who knew exactly how to sound gentle. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" Olivia finally managed. It came out flat, careful, the voice of someone walking across ice. "I came to see you," he said, like it was obvious, like it was sweet. "I flew in this morning. Do you know how many coffee shops I've walked into looking for you? Your sister mentioned this was your spot. Fridays, right, you and Claire?" He smiled. "Some things don't change. I always liked that about you." Ethan felt something cold move through him at the mention of Claire. He didn't know Daniel. He'd known him for 90 seconds, but he already understood something about him the way you understand a storm is coming before the first drop falls. Daniel had done his homework. He knew where she'd be. He'd used her sister to find her, and he'd said it out loud like it was romantic. "You shouldn't be here," Olivia said. "That's a strange thing to say to someone who flew across the country for you. I didn't ask you to." "No," Daniel agreed easily. "You never asked me for anything. That was always the problem, wasn't it? You never asked. You just gave." He pulled out the empty chair, Claire's chair, and before Ethan could say a word, before Olivia could stop him, he sat down in it. "So I thought I'd do the asking this time." Ethan saw Olivia flinch, not at the words, at the chair. He watched her eyes drop to the seat Daniel had just claimed, the seat that had sat empty for 6 months, because filling it felt like losing her sister, and he watched something break behind her face. "Get up," Ethan said. It was the first thing he'd said. Both of them looked at him like they'd forgotten he was there. Daniel turned slowly, and for the first time really looked at Ethan. He took him in the way a man appraises a used car. The jacket, the plain coffee, the nobody sitting across from the woman he'd come to collect. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, smiling. "And you are?" "That's her sister's chair," Ethan said. "Get up." Daniel's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "Her sister's chair," he repeated. "How touching. You two must be close if you know about the chair." He looked back at Olivia. "Who's your friend's sweetheart?" The word landed like a slap. Sweetheart. Ethan saw Olivia's whole body react to it, a small, involuntary tightening, the reflex of a woman who had heard that word used as a weapon for years. "His name is Ethan," Olivia said quietly. "He's a friend." "A friend." Daniel nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. "Well, Ethan, this is a private conversation between me and Olivia. I'm sure you understand." "Olivia," Ethan said, keeping his eyes on her, ignoring Daniel completely. "Do you want me to go?" And this was the moment. This was the whole thing right here in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Because Olivia looked at him, and Ethan could see the war happening behind her eyes. The part of her that had spent years learning to make things easy to avoid the scene, to keep the peace at any cost. That part was already forming the words. "It's fine, it's okay, you can go, I'll handle it." But another part of her, a newer part, a part that had spent the last several weeks sitting across a table from a man who let her sentences be true instead of rushing to fix them, that part held on. "No," she said. "Stay." The same word she'd said to him the first day. "You can stay." It hung in the air between all three of them, and Ethan understood that it meant something now that it hadn't meant then. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly. He wasn't used to this. You could see it. He wasn't used to the word no coming out of her mouth, and he definitely wasn't used to it in front of an audience. "Olivia," he said, and now the smoothness had an edge under it. "I flew 2,000 miles. The least you could do is give me 10 minutes alone." "You could have called," she said. "You'd have hung up. Then that would have been your answer." Something flickered across Daniel's face, and for 1 second the mask slipped, and Ethan saw what was underneath it. Not love, not longing, something closer to irritation. The irritation of a man whose plan wasn't going the way it was supposed to go. Then the mask went right back up. "I've changed," Daniel said, and he softened his voice again, and God, he was good at it. Ethan had to give him that. He was good at it. "That's what I came here to tell you. I know how it ended. I know it was my fault. I've had a lot of time to think, and I've realized that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life." He leaned forward. Nobody has ever understood me the way you did, Liv. Nobody. I've dated. I've tried. And every single time I sit across from someone new, I think, she's not you. She'll never be you. Ethan watched Olivia's face and felt his stomach twist because he could see it working. He could see the words getting in, not because they were true, because they were the exact words she had spent years starving for. You never said that when we were together, Olivia said, but her voice had lost some of its steel. I was a fool when we were together. I took you for granted. I see that now. Daniel reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and Olivia didn't pull away, and Ethan felt that like a physical thing. Come back with me. Just for a few days. Just to talk. I have a car outside. We'll go somewhere quiet away from... He glanced at Ethan without turning his head. Distractions. And we'll figure this out, the way we always used to. Take your hand off her, Ethan said. Daniel didn't move. I'm sorry. Are you her husband? Her brother? What exactly is your claim here, friend? I don't need a claim, Ethan said. She said stay. That means you don't get to drag her out of here, so take your hand off her. For a long moment, nobody moved. And then slowly, Daniel lifted his hand from Olivia's, and he sat back, and he smiled a smile that never reached his eyes. You've got yourself a guard dog, he said to Olivia. That's cute. Is that what you're doing now, replacing me with the first man who buys you a coffee and tells you your feelings are valid? He said the last part in a mocking little voice. Because I'll tell you something about that, Liv. That's not real. That easy stuff, that gentle stuff, it feels good for a month. And then real life shows up. Bills, stress, the version of you that isn't fun to be around. And people like this, he gestured at Ethan, they don't stick around for that part. I did. For 4 years I stuck around. You stuck around, Olivia said slowly, because I made myself small enough to fit into whatever room you left for me. The words came out of her almost in surprise, like she hadn't known she was going to say them until they were already in the air. Daniel blinked. That's not fair, he said. Isn't it? And now something was rising in her. Ethan could hear it, a shaking thing years old. I gave up the New York contract because you didn't like me traveling. I stopped seeing Marcy and Dana because you said they were bad influences. I turned down my own show, Daniel. My own show, because you had a bad week and you needed me home. Her voice cracked. And you know what you said? When I told you I turned it down, you said good. You didn't even say thank you. You said good, like I'd finally gotten something right. The cafe had gone quiet around them. A few heads had turned. But Olivia didn't seem to notice, and for the first time she didn't seem to care. Daniel's expression had changed. The warmth was gone now, all of it, and what was left was something Ethan recognized. The look of a man who had come to collect something and found it wasn't sitting where he'd left it. You're rewriting history, Daniel said quietly. You always did this. You'd take everything I ever did for you and turn it into a crime. Everything you did for me, Olivia repeated. I supported you. I gave you a home. I gave you stability when your whole family was falling apart, when Claire couldn't be bothered to... Don't, Olivia said sharply. Do not bring Claire into this. Don't you dare. And there it was. Ethan saw the flash of it. That was the crack Daniel had been looking for, and now he'd found it. And men like Daniel do not find a crack without pressing on it. Why not? Daniel said softer now, more dangerous. You want to talk about people who left you? Claire left you, Olivia. The second something better came along, she was gone. Across the country. You sit here every Friday like a ghost staring at an empty chair because your own sister walked out of your life without looking back. And I'm the villain. He shook his head slowly. I'm the only one who never left. Think about that. Ethan watched those words land, and he watched them do exactly what Daniel wanted them to do, and he could not stand it for one more second. Can I say something? Ethan said. It wasn't really a question. Daniel spread his hands. By all means. The guard dog speaks. Ethan ignored the insult. He turned to Olivia, and he spoke to her, and only to her like Daniel wasn't even in the room. He's very good at this, Ethan said quietly. I want you to hear me. He is genuinely impressively good at this. He walked in here 5 minutes ago, and he already knows exactly which words hurt you the most. He knows about Claire. He knows about the chair. He knows the show you gave up. And he's using every single one of them not to make you feel loved, but to make you feel guilty. He held her eyes. That's not a man who missed you. That's a man who missed having someone who let him do this. Daniel laughed. You've known her, what, a month, and you're going to lecture me about... I've known her long enough, Ethan said, to notice that when you walked in, she got smaller. I've watched this woman go toe-to-toe with me every morning for weeks. She's the sharpest person I've ever met. She notices everything. She doesn't back down from anything. He didn't look away from her. And you walked through that door and she folded up like she was trying to disappear. I've never seen her do that. Not once. Until you. Olivia was staring at him now. Her eyes were wet. That's not love, Ethan said gently. Whatever that reaction is, whatever makes a woman like this shrink the second you enter a room that is not love. And somewhere in there, I think you already know it. The silence that followed was the longest of Ethan's life. Daniel wasn't smiling anymore. He was looking at Ethan with a flat, cold assessment, recalculating the way a chess player looks at a board that just turned against him. Olivia, Daniel said, and he tried one more time to find the gentle voice, but it came out strained, now cracked at the edges. You're going to listen to this, some stranger, over 4 years, over everything we... I want you to leave, Olivia said. It was barely above a whisper, but it was clear, and it was hers. Daniel went still. What? I want you to leave, Daniel. Louder now, steadier. You didn't fly here for me. You flew here because someone finally stopped fitting into the shape you wanted them in and you couldn't stand it. That's not missing me. That's losing a possession. She took a breath and it shook, but she kept going. And I'm not a possession. Not anymore. Not yours. Get up out of my sister's chair and leave. For a moment, Ethan genuinely didn't know what Daniel would do. There was something in the man's face, a tightness, a coiled thing that made the whole table feel dangerous. Then Daniel stood. He buttoned his coat slow and deliberate, and he looked down at Olivia with an expression that had gone completely empty. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. Not today, maybe not this year, but you're going to be sitting alone at this table some Friday morning older, and this guy'll be long gone because that's what these ones do, and Claire will still be on the other side of the country, and you're going to think about the man who flew 2,000 miles for you, and you're going to wonder why you threw him out over a cup of coffee. He straightened his cuffs. I hope he's worth it. He didn't fly here for me, Olivia said. He just sat down. That turned out to be worth a lot more. Daniel looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the willow corner, and the bell over the door rang, and he was gone. The whole cafe seemed to exhale. Olivia sat very still for a long moment, and then all at once the strength went out of her, and she put her face in her hands, and her shoulders started to shake. Ethan didn't reach for her. He'd learned that much about her already, that she didn't want to be grabbed, didn't want to be fixed, didn't want someone rushing in to make the hard thing smaller than it was. So he just stayed. He stayed in his chair across the table, present the way she'd once let him stay in hers. I'm okay, she said, muffled into her hands. I'm not crying. I'm just... Give me a second. Take all the seconds you want, Ethan said. I'm not going anywhere. She laughed, wet and broken and real. God, I hate that he made me do that in public. You didn't do anything. He walked in here and ambushed you at 7 a.m. You held your ground. That's not nothing, Olivia. That's the opposite of nothing. She finally lifted her face out of her hands. Her eyes were red. I let him sit in Claire's chair, she said, and her voice broke completely on the name. 6 months. 6 months I kept it empty, and he sat down in it like it was nothing, and I didn't even stop him. He did that on purpose, Ethan said. He knew what that chair meant to you. He sat in it to knock you off balance. That's not on you. How do you know that? Because it's what I would look for, Ethan said. If I were a man like that and I wanted to win, you find the thing that means the most and you step on it so the person can't think straight. He didn't sit in that chair by accident. He aimed for it. Olivia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You really see everything, don't you? Only sometimes. He gave her a small, crooked smile. I'm significantly worse at seeing it when it's about me. That got a real laugh out of her, small but real, and Ethan felt the knot in his own chest loosen a little. They sat there in silence for a while. The cafe slowly returned to normal around them, and when Olivia finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but it had something new in it, something steadier, like a person who had just walked through a fire and discovered she hadn't burned all the way down. Can I tell you something I've never said out loud? She asked. Anything. She turned her cup slowly on the table, gathering herself. When I was with him, I spent, I don't know, years wondering what was wrong with me. Genuinely. like it was a math problem I couldn't solve. Why wasn't I enough? Why did I always feel like I was auditioning for a part I already had? Why, no matter what I did, I always felt like I was coming in second in my own relationship? She looked up. And then he'd do this thing. He'd find someone else. Not always, not always cheating. But his attention would just go somewhere else. Some new client. Some new project. Some woman who was more fun than I was that month. And I'd panic and I'd shrink myself down even more, trying to become whatever he wanted, trying to win back the attention I never should have had to compete for in the first place. Ethan didn't say anything. He just listened the way he always did, the way she'd told him weeks ago no one had ever done for her. And the whole time, Olivia went on, I kept asking the same question, over and over. Why didn't he choose me? Why wasn't I enough to be chosen? Her eyes filled again. I've been asking that question for 4 years, Ethan. 4 years. Even after we broke up. Even after I moved back here. I still lie awake some nights asking it. Why didn't he choose me? And Ethan sat forward, and he looked at her, and he said the thing that he would later realize was the truest thing he'd said in years. You keep asking why he didn't choose you, Ethan said quietly. But maybe the real question the whole time was why you stopped choosing yourself. Olivia went completely still. The words hit her somewhere deep, somewhere old, somewhere that had been waiting a very long time to hear exactly that sentence. Ethan watched them land. He watched her breath catch. He watched her eyes go wide and then fill and then spill over, and this time she didn't hide her face. This time she just let it happen. Quiet tears running down, while she stared at him like he'd handed her a key to a door she'd forgotten was locked. Say that again, she whispered. Why you stopped choosing yourself, Ethan said gently. You've spent 4 years asking why you weren't enough for him, but you were never the problem, Olivia. The problem was that somewhere along the way, you handed him the only vote that ever mattered, your own, and you've been waiting for him to cast it ever since. He shook his head slowly. You don't need him to choose you. You never did. You needed you to. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. And when she finally did, her voice was so small it almost disappeared. I don't know how, she said. I genuinely don't know how to do that anymore. I don't even know if I ever knew how. Yeah, Ethan said softly. I know the feeling. She looked at him, then really looked in that way she had, the way that seemed to see right through whatever a person was pretending to be. And something in her expression shifted from pain into something more curious, more careful. You do, don't you? She said. You know exactly what that feels like. More than I'd like to admit. Then how come, she said slowly, you can see it so clearly in me, and I've never once heard you turn any of that wisdom around on yourself. And just like that, the light that had been so warm on her turned and shone straight at him, and Ethan felt the old familiar instinct rise up in his chest, the instinct to deflect, to joke, to pull back into the safe small space where no one could reach him. We're talking about you today, he said, reaching for his coffee. You're doing it right now, Olivia said. You're tapping. He looked down. His fingers were drumming against the table. He stopped. See, that's not fair, he said. You can't use my own tell against me. Why not you just use a man's entire personality against him in front of the whole cafe? Turnabout's fair play. But she was smiling when she said it, and then the smile softened into something more serious. I mean it, though, Ethan. You show up here every morning and you let me fall apart all over this table, and you never once let me anywhere near whatever it is you're carrying. And you are carrying something. I've known it since the first week. A man doesn't move 1,700 miles and set out 2 coffee cups by accident unless he's running from something big. Ethan didn't answer. Who was she? Olivia asked gently. And Ethan, who had spent 2 years never saying her name out loud, who had told himself the whole point of Austin was that no one here would ever ask, felt the question settle over him like something heavy and long overdue. He opened his mouth. He wasn't sure what was going to come out. But before he could say a word, his phone buzzed hard against the table between them. Once, twice, a third time insistent. And when he glanced down at it out of nothing but reflex, he saw a name on the screen that made every muscle in his body go rigid. A name he had not seen in 2 years. A name he had deleted and somehow still knew by heart. And the color drained out of his face so fast that Olivia stopped mid-breath and said, Ethan. What is it? Who is that? But Ethan couldn't answer her. He just stared down at the phone, at that name, at the past he'd driven 2,000 miles to outrun, now lighting up his screen in a quiet cafe, where for a few weeks he'd almost let himself believe he was finally free of it. The name on the screen was Claire. Not his ex, not the past he'd driven 2,000 miles to escape. Ethan blinked at it, and his heart, which had slammed into his throat, slowly began to come back down, because the name wasn't the one his gut had braced for. It was a different Claire. Olivia's Claire. "It's your sister," Ethan said, and his voice came out strange thin, the leftover panic still shaking in it. "Your sister is calling me." Olivia frowned. "That's not possible. Claire doesn't have your number." "Well, somebody named Claire is calling my phone." Olivia leaned across the table, and when she saw the screen, her whole face changed. Wait. She grabbed the phone. "That's not your Claire. Oh God, it's mine. It's my Claire. But how does she have your—" And then understanding dawned, and her eyes went wide. "The coffee shop. She called the shop last week looking for me because my phone was dead and they didn't have my number, so they must have—" "Oh no. Did they give her yours?" "Did I give the barista your number as a backup when my phone died? I think I did. I think I actually did that." The phone kept buzzing. "You should answer it," Ethan said. Olivia stared at the screen like it might bite her. 6 months. 6 months she'd left that chair empty rather than admit her sister was really gone. 6 months of Friday mornings of a phone she checked and never called back, of a grief she'd wrapped around herself like a coat. And now, here it was, ringing in her hand. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Olivia." Ethan reached across the table, not to grab her, just to steady her, his hand flat near hers. "10 minutes ago, you threw a man out of this cafe for stepping on the memory of your sister. And now the actual sister is calling you. Answer the phone." Her thumb hovered. The buzzing stopped. For one horrible second, they both thought it was over, that she'd missed it, that some things you only get one shot at. Then it started again, Claire calling back, and this time Olivia answered. "Claire." Her voice cracked on the single word. "Claire, hi, it's me, I'm here." A pause. Ethan watched her face crumple and reassemble itself 3 times in as many seconds. "No, I'm fine, the phone's not, it's a long story. Whose phone is this? He's a friend, Claire." Another pause longer, and then Olivia's free hand came up to cover her mouth, and her eyes filled. "You did what your weight, slow down. Slow down. What do you mean you're in Austin?" Ethan went still. "You're at the airport," Olivia repeated, and now the tears were falling freely, and she wasn't wiping them. She was just letting them come. "Right now. You're at the airport right now. Claire, why didn't you didn't tell me I would have—" She stopped. She listened, and something in her expression broke open some 6-month wound finally splitting wide. "Because you didn't want me to talk you out of it," she said softly. Yeah, I hear you. Stay there. Don't move. Do not move. Claire, I'm coming to get you. I'm coming right now." She hung up. She sat there for a moment, phone clutched in both hands, staring at nothing. "She quit," Olivia said to the table, to Ethan, to no one. "The job, the big job across the country, the one I told her to take. She quit it 3 days ago. She's been flying home. She's here. She's at the airport right now with 2 suitcases and no plan. And she called to tell me she made a mistake, that no job in the world was worth being that far from the only family she had left." Olivia looked up, and her face was wrecked and shining and disbelieving all at once. "She's home, Ethan. My sister came home." "Then what are you doing sitting here?" Ethan said, and he was already reaching for his keys. "Come on, I'll drive." The drive to the airport was the fastest 20 minutes of Ethan's life, mostly because Olivia narrated the entire 6 months of silence between the 2 sisters at 100 miles an hour, all the things she'd wanted to say, and hadn't, all the calls she'd let go to voicemail, because picking up meant admitting how much it hurt all the Fridays she'd sat in that cafe, guarding an empty chair like a monument. And Ethan just drove and listened, because listening was the thing he was best at, the one gift he'd never doubted he had. They pulled up to the terminal, and there on the curb stood a woman who looked so much like Olivia that Ethan's breath caught. Same brown hair, a little longer. Same warm eyes, a little more tired. 2 suitcases beside her, and a look on her face like someone who had jumped off a cliff and was still deciding whether it was the best or worst thing she'd ever done. Olivia was out of the car before it fully stopped. Ethan stayed where he was and watched the two sisters collide on the curb, watched them hold on to each other, like the world was ending. Watched Olivia say something into Claire's shoulder that made them both laugh and cry at the same time, and he felt something he hadn't expected. He felt like an intruder on something sacred, and underneath that he felt something sharper, something that took him a second to name. He felt alone. Because Ethan didn't have a Claire. Ethan didn't have anyone who would quit a job and fly across the country and stand on a curb with 2 suitcases just to be near him. He'd made sure of that. He'd spent 2 years making absolutely sure of that. When Olivia finally led Claire back to the car, she was glowing, wrecked and glowing, and she said, "Claire, this is Ethan. Ethan, this is my sister, the chair's owner." Claire looked at Ethan with a curious, appraising warmth, the same look Olivia had apparently a family trait. "So you're the friend," she said, and there was something in the way she said friend that made Olivia go slightly pink. "The one whose phone I called. I've heard exactly nothing about you, which knowing my sister means you're either nobody or you're everything. She only goes quiet about the important ones." "Claire," Olivia warned. "I'm just saying." Claire climbed into the back seat. 6 months of you not answering my calls, and the one time you do, you're at your Friday table and it's a man's phone and there's a coffee cup that isn't yours in front of the seat across from you. I notice things. It runs in the family." Ethan caught Olivia's eye in the rearview mirror. She was fighting a smile and losing. They took Claire back to Olivia's apartment, and the two sisters talked for hours, and Ethan, who had offered 100 times to leave and give them space, kept getting told to stay by Olivia until eventually he stopped offering and just let himself be part of it. And it was good. It was genuinely warmly good, the kind of afternoon he hadn't had in years, full of laughter and old stories and the easy comfort of people who loved each other. And that was exactly the problem. Because somewhere in the middle of that good afternoon, watching Olivia lit up with a joy he had never seen on her before, Ethan felt the old machinery in his chest start to turn. The careful machinery. The machinery that had kept him safe for 2 years by making sure he never had anything worth losing. "She's got her sister now," the machinery whispered. "She's whole again. She doesn't need you. And more than that, look how much she can lose. Look how much love is in this room. Look what it costs. You know what that costs. You've paid it." By the time Ethan drove home that night, the warmth had curdled into something colder, and by the time he got Cooper fed and the lights off and lay in the dark of his small apartment, the machinery had done its work. It had a voice, and the voice was reasonable and calm, and it sounded like wisdom instead of fear. It said, "You're getting in too deep." It said, "You've watched her get destroyed by one man in that cafe today. Don't be the next one." It said, "She's just come out of 4 years with someone who made her small. The last thing she needs is a man who's still in love with a ghost." And that last one, Ethan thought, staring at the ceiling, was the truest and cruelest of them all. Because Olivia had asked him a question in the cafe that morning right before the phone rang. Who was she? And Ethan had never answered it. The phone had saved him. And lying there in the dark, he made a quiet decision, the kind of decision cowards make and call caution. He decided he wasn't going to answer it. Not that question. Not ever. He decided the safest thing, the kindest thing, the smartest thing was to start pulling back before he got in any deeper. So he did what he always did. He started creating distance. The next morning, for the first time in weeks, Ethan didn't go to the Willow Corner. He told himself he was busy. He had a project deadline, which was true technically in the sense that he always had a project deadline. He sat at his kitchen table and worked, and did not look at his phone. And when it buzzed around 8 with a message from Olivia, a simple, "Where are you? You okay?" He looked at it for a long time and then set the phone face down and did not answer. He didn't go the next day either. By the 3rd day, the messages had changed. They'd gone from "Where are you?" to a single line, "Did I do something?" And that one nearly broke him. Because he knew that voice. He knew exactly where that voice came from. It came from 4 years of a man teaching her that when someone pulled away, it was her fault that she'd done something wrong, that she needed to figure out what she'd broken and fix it. Ethan was doing to her without meaning to the exact thing Daniel had done. He was making her ask, "What's wrong with me?" He typed out 3 different replies. He deleted all of them. He set the phone down. How was he realized somewhere around day 4, a coward. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind who doesn't slam any doors, who never says anything cruel, who simply goes still and lets a good thing die of neglect, so he never has to be the one who ends it. He'd done it before. He'd done it his whole life. He'd probably done it, he thought, with a fresh stab of shame to the woman in Seattle too, before she ever faded into silence. Maybe the silence had started with him. On the 5th day, his phone buzzed one more time. And it was different. It wasn't a question. It wasn't "where are you" or "did I do something?" It was one line, and Ethan read it and felt it go straight through him. "Did you find another table, or are you just afraid to sit here?" He read it 5 times. Because she'd figured it out. Of course she had. She noticed everything. She'd taken his own silence and read it the way she read everything, all the way down to the bone, and she'd handed it back to him in the form of the one question he could not run from. It wasn't accusing. That was the worst part. It wasn't angry. It was gentle, and it was patient, and it saw him completely, and it asked the only thing that mattered. "Are you afraid?" And the answer Ethan knew lying there with his thumb hovering over the screen was yes. Yes, he was afraid. He'd been afraid the whole time. He'd been afraid since the second morning, since the 2 cups of coffee, since the moment he realized she'd chosen to be there again. I wasn't afraid of Olivia. He was afraid of caring about Olivia, because caring was the beginning, and the beginning always led to the end. And the end was a cold grave and a silent apartment and a name on a phone screen that made your whole body go rigid. He didn't reply. That was the worst thing he did in the whole story, and he knew it even as he did it. He read that perfect, gentle, devastating question, and he set the phone down and he didn't reply, because replying meant staying and staying meant risking. And Ethan Miller had spent his entire adult life proving to himself that the safest place to stand was just outside the door. I didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark, and Cooper pressed against his side, and he thought about a lot of things. He thought about his father and the last conversation they'd had, which had been about nothing about a football game because he'd assumed there'd be 1,000 more conversations, and there hadn't been. He thought about the woman in Seattle and the way the silence had grown between them, like frost on a window, until one day he couldn't see her through it anymore. I thought about how both of those losses had taught him the same lesson, that love was just a loan the universe called in whenever it wanted, and the only way to keep your balance was to never borrow in the first place. And then, somewhere in the deepest part of the night, he thought about something Olivia had said to him in the cafe. "You can see it so clearly in me," she'd said, "and you've never once turned any of that wisdom around on yourself." He'd told her the truest thing he knew that morning. You keep asking why he didn't choose you when the real question is why you stopped choosing yourself. And lying there in the dark, it finally occurred to Ethan with the slow horror of a man catching his own reflection in a window. He didn't know was there that he had spent 2 years asking why the universe kept taking people from him. Why his father? Why the woman in Seattle? Why him? Why did he keep losing everyone he loved? But he'd never once asked the other question. The real one. The one he'd handed to Olivia and never applied to himself. Why had he stopped choosing anyone at all? The universe hadn't taken Olivia from him. Olivia was 3 miles away, sending him gentle questions, keeping his coffee warm, saving a seat. The universe hadn't done anything. He had. He was at that very moment in the middle of the night doing the taking himself with his own 2 hands and calling it protection. He sat up in the dark. Cooper lifted his head and looked at him. "I'm an idiot," Ethan said to the dog. Cooper thumped his tail once, which Ethan chose to take as agreement. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. But it wasn't the bad kind of not sleeping anymore. It was the kind where something is changing in you painfully, the way a bone that's healed wrong has to be broken again to be set right. He lay there, and he let himself feel all of it, every ounce of the fear he'd been managing and medicating and hiding behind logic for 2 solid years, and for the first time, he didn't try to make it smaller. He just let it be true. The way she'd taught him, that first week without either of them knowing that's what she was doing. He just let it be true, and to his surprise, it didn't kill him. Morning came gray and slow. Ethan got up. He fed Cooper. He stood in his kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and he looked at his phone on the counter at Olivia's last message still sitting there, unanswered, that gentle, unbearable question, and he knew that whatever he did in the next hour would decide the shape of the rest of his life. He could reply with a text. It would be easier. He could type out some careful apology, some measured explanation, and keep the whole thing safely behind a screen where it couldn't hurt him too much. Or he could do the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that terrified him. He could go. He could walk 4 blocks to a little coffee shop and sit down across from a woman who saw him all the way down to the bone, and he could finally, after 2 years after a lifetime, answer the question he'd been running from. Not who was she, the other one. The one Olivia hadn't even had to ask because it was written all over him. Why did you stop choosing anyone at all? Ethan set the coffee down. He got his jacket. His hand was on the door, Cooper watching him from the kitchen, and he stood there for one long moment, and every instinct he'd spent 35 years building told him to turn around to stay safe, to protect himself the way he always had. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Miller decided that the thing he'd been calling protection was actually the thing that had been killing him slowly all along. That the small, safe life he'd been so proud of surviving wasn't survival at all. It was just a slower way of disappearing. He opened the door. He stepped out into the gray morning, and he started walking toward the willow corner, toward the table in the corner, toward the woman who'd once looked at a stranger who'd taken her seat and said, "You can stay," not knowing whether she'd still be there when he arrived, not knowing whether 5 days of silence had finally taught her to stop saving a seat for a man who kept refusing to sit in it, not knowing anything at all, except that for the first time in 2 years, he was walking towards something instead of away from it, and that whatever was waiting for him at that table, he was done running before he even reached it. The bell over the door rang, and Ethan stepped inside, and there she was. Same corner, same table. Olivia was already sitting there, a cup in front of her and the seat across from her. His seat was empty. She looked up when the bell rang the way she always did, and when she saw him standing there in the doorway with rain on his shoulders and 5 days of silence between them, she didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She just watched him steady and careful the way you watch something you're not sure is going to stay. Ethan walked over. His heart was pounding so hard he was certain the whole cafe could hear it. He stopped at the table. "You almost left," Olivia said. It wasn't a question. "I know. 5 days." She turned her cup slowly on the table, not looking at him now. 5 days, Ethan. No word. Nothing. And I sat here every single morning like an idiot, keeping your seat, telling myself you'd show up. Do you have any idea what that felt like? "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I think I do." "Do you?" She looked up, and her eyes had that shine in them, the one that meant she was holding something back with everything she had. Because from where I was sitting, it felt exactly like it used to feel with him. Someone I cared about going quiet on me and leaving me to figure out what I'd done wrong. I spent 4 years learning that dance, Ethan. I got real good at it, and I promised myself I would never, ever do it again. And then you disappeared, and I caught myself doing it anyway. Sitting here, wondering what was wrong with me, rewriting every conversation we ever had, trying to find the moment I messed it up. Her voice cracked. "You made me feel small again, and I didn't think anyone was going to get to do that to me anymore." Ethan stood there and took it, every word of it, because every word of it was true, and he'd earned all of it. "Can I sit down?" he said. "I don't know. Can you? You seemed pretty unsure about it for the better part of a week." "Olivia." "Sit down, Ethan." She said it tired, worn out, but she said it. "You're making everyone nervous standing there like the roof's about to fall in." He sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Ethan looked at the coffee in front of the empty seat and realized it was for him. She'd ordered it. Even after 5 days, even furious, even hurt, she'd ordered him a coffee and set it across from her. "You ordered me a coffee," he said. "Don't read into it. There's cinnamon in it." "There's cinnamon in it because I ordered it when I was stressed and I wasn't going to drink too." She pushed it an inch toward him, the same gesture from that second morning a lifetime ago now. "You want it or not?" He wrapped both hands around the cup. It was still warm. "You asked me a question," Ethan said. 5 days ago, right before your sister called. You asked me who she was." Olivia went still. "And I didn't answer. The phone rang and I let it save me, and then I spent 5 days making sure I'd never have to answer it." He looked down at the coffee. "I'm going to answer it now, if you'll let me. That's why I came. Not to apologize, though I do. I'm sorry, Olivia. I'm more sorry than I know how to say. But I came to answer the question." Olivia didn't say anything. She just waited the way he'd waited for her so many times. "Her name was Sarah," Ethan said, and the name came out of him rusty, unused, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. "We were together 6 years. 6 years. We weren't married, but we may as well have been. We had a place in Seattle. We had plans. We had one of those relationships that everybody assumes is going to make it, the steady one, the safe one. He turned the cup slowly, and it didn't end. That's the thing I could never explain to anybody. It didn't end. There was no fight. There was no other person. Nobody did anything wrong exactly. It just faded, like a photograph left in a window. One day I looked up and I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in months. We were roommates who used to be in love, and neither of us said anything about it because saying something meant admitting it, and admitting it meant it was over, and it was easier, so much easier to just let it keep fading. "What happened?" Olivia asked quietly. "She left, eventually. She was braver than me in the end. She said one night out of nowhere, she said, 'Ethan, I feel like I'm living with a ghost and I'm becoming one too and I can't do it anymore.' And she was right. She was completely right. And you know what I did?" He laughed and there was no humor in it. "I said, okay, that's it. That's the whole thing I said. 6 years and she tells me she's disappearing and I say okay. Because I'd already gone somewhere she couldn't reach. I'd already pulled back so far there was nothing left to fight for. I let it die, Olivia. I watched it die for probably 2 years, and I never lifted a finger because lifting a finger meant caring, and caring meant it could hurt me." Olivia was very quiet now. "And then 2 months after she left," Ethan went on and his voice dropped, "my father had a heart attack, and I got a phone call, and I got on a plane, and by the time I landed, he was gone. I never got to say anything to him. The last real conversation we had was about a football game. A football game, Olivia. Because I assumed there'd be more. I always assume there'll be more. That's my whole entire problem. I keep myself at arm's length from everyone I love because it feels safer. And I tell myself I'll get closer later when it's less scary, and then later never comes. And one day the person is just gone, and I'm standing there realizing I spent the whole time protecting myself from a loss I couldn't prevent anyway. I looked up at her. "So I moved here. Fresh start, I told everybody. New city, new life. And I set out 2 coffee cups every morning for a woman who wasn't coming. And I sat alone at a table in a coffee shop, and I called it healing. And then one rainy Friday, I took the wrong seat, and a woman I'd never met looked at me and said, 'You can stay.' And for the first time in 2 years, I felt something crack open in my chest that I thought had closed up for good." His hands tightened around the cup. "And that terrified me more than anything Sarah or my father or anybody ever did. Because losing something you've decided not to want doesn't cost you anything. But you, Olivia, wanting you, that's a debt I'd have to pay if it ever went wrong. And 5 days ago I got scared of the bill and I ran. And I did to you the exact thing that man did to you for 4 years, and I will never forgive myself for that. But I needed you to know it wasn't you. It was never you. It was me, doing the only thing I know how to do when something matters, leaving before it can leave me." The cafe was quiet around them. Olivia had both hands around her own cup now, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read, and the silence stretched on long enough that Ethan started to think he'd said too much or not enough, or the wrong things entirely. Then Olivia said, "You want to know why I really kept coming back to this table after Claire left? You told me, your sister, the chair. That's part of it. It's the part I let myself believe because it's the noble part, the grieving sister part." She shook her head slowly. "But it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is uglier than that." She took a breath. "I kept coming back to this table because it was safe, because it was familiar, because sitting here every Friday morning meant I never had to build anything new. As long as I was guarding Claire's empty chair, I had a reason not to move forward with my own life. I got to call it loyalty. I got to call it grief. But it was fear, Ethan. It was the exact same fear you're describing. I was waiting for something familiar to come back, so I'd never have to risk something new." Ethan stared at her. "That's why Daniel almost got me," Olivia said. "You saw it, in the cafe that day. He walked in and I got small, and you couldn't understand why because you'd only ever seen the sharp version of me. But the reason I got small is because he was familiar. He was the old shape. And some sick, tired part of me looked at 4 years of pain and thought, at least I know how that hurts. At least it's a hurt I've already learned. New things could hurt in ways I don't know yet. And I was so scared of the unknown hurt that I almost walked back into the known one." She looked at him. "You pulled me out of that. You looked at me across this table and you said, 'That's not love. That's a man who misses having someone who lets him do this.' And you were right. And it saved me." Her voice broke. "And then you turned around and did the same exact thing I almost did. You ran toward the familiar. except your familiar is being alone. So you ran back to that. Ethan felt the truth of it land in his chest, like a stone dropped in still water. "We're the same," he said quietly. "We're the same," Olivia agreed. "That's what scared me most, honestly. Not that you left, that I understood exactly why, that I'd have done it too a year ago. That's the thing about meeting someone who's carrying the same wound you are. You recognize each other. And it's the most comforting thing in the world, and the most dangerous because two people who both run when things get real can talk themselves into anything, including running. Together separately at the same time, in opposite directions." Ethan set his coffee down. His hands weren't tapping. He noticed that. For the first time in a long time, in a moment when they should have been drumming out of nerves, they were still. "I don't want to run anymore," he said. "People say that. I know they do. And I know I'm one of them. I've said a version of that to myself every year for a decade, and then done the opposite." He leaned forward. "But I walked here this morning, Olivia. I had my phone in my hand. I could have texted you. It would have been so much easier to hide behind a screen and say all this where it couldn't cost me anything. And instead I put the phone down and I walked 4 blocks in the rain, not knowing if you'd even still be here, because for the first time in my life, I wanted to do the harder thing. I wanted to sit in the chair. I wanted to be a person who sits in the chair." He swallowed. "You asked me in that message, did I find another table, or was I just afraid to sit here? And the answer is, I was afraid. I was so afraid. But I'm here. I sat down. That has to count for something, even if it doesn't count for everything." Olivia looked at him for a long, long moment. "You know what the worst part of those 5 days was," she said finally. "It wasn't the silence. I've survived worse silences. It was that I couldn't decide which was scarier, that you'd never come back, or that you would." She wiped at her eyes quickly, almost angrily. "Because if you never came back, that just proved the thing I already believed, that everyone eventually leaves, and the smart move is to never let anyone matter. That's a sad thing to believe, but it's a safe one. But if you came back then, I had to actually do this. I had to actually risk it. And God help me, Ethan, I sat here this morning genuinely hoping you wouldn't show up, because it would have been easier. It would have hurt in a way I already understood. Yeah. And instead I showed up. And instead you showed up." She let out a shaky breath. "You inconsiderate man." And there it was buried in the middle of all that pain, the smallest ghost of the old teasing. And Ethan felt his whole chest unlock, because if she was giving him a hard time, she wasn't gone. She was still there. She'd still, somewhere underneath all the hurt, saved him a seat. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were braver than me this whole time. You threw Daniel out. You answered Claire's call. You keep walking toward the hard things. I keep walking away from them. If we're the same, you're the better version." "I'm not braver than you," Olivia said. "I've just been in therapy longer." And that startled a real laugh out of him, and out of her too, and for a second the weight in the air lifted. Then she got serious again. "I need to say something," she said, "and I need you to actually hear it, not just nod. Can you do that?" "Yeah." "I'm not going to be a project for you, Ethan. I'm not going to be the woman you save. You did a beautiful thing that day with Daniel. You saw me clearly, and you said the thing I needed to hear, and I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life. But I've spent 4 years being someone's fixer-upper, being the thing a man works on. I'm done with that. If we do this, we do it as two people who both already saved themselves, who are choosing to sit at the same table because we want to, not because either of us needs rescuing. Do you understand the difference?" "I do," Ethan said. "I think if I'm honest, I've been treating you a little bit like a rescue because it's easier than being rescued. It's easier to be the one who has the wise thing to say than to be the one who admits he's scared. It kept me one step removed, safe." He nodded slowly. "No more of that. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to sit with you. That's all. That's the whole thing I want. To sit here and be honest even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Olivia studied him. "You know I'll always be able to tell when you're lying," she said. "The finger thing. You can't help it." "I'm counting on it," Ethan said. "Somebody's got to keep me honest. God knows I can't do it myself." She almost smiled. Almost. Then something crossed her face, a flicker of the fear again, and she said very quietly the most honest thing she'd said all morning. "I'm scared this is going to end," she said. "I'm scared we're going to be so good at understanding each other's fear that we just permission slip each other right out of it. that the first time something gets hard, we'll both recognize the exit at the same time, and we'll take it, and we'll be so gentle about it that neither of us even has to feel like the bad guy. Two ghosts agreeing to fade. I'm scared of that, Ethan. More than I'm scared of him, or of being alone, or of anything. I'm scared that the very thing that makes us understand each other is the thing that'll let us destroy it. And Ethan sat with that because it deserved to be sat with, and then he said the truest thing he had. Then let's promise each other something, he said. Not forever. I'm not going to stand here and promise you forever, because I've watched forever fade twice, and I don't trust the word anymore, and I don't think you do either. He held her eyes. But I'll promise you this. The next time I want to run, I'll tell you. Out loud. I won't just go quiet and disappear and let you sit here wondering what's wrong with you. I'll say the words. I'll say, Olivia, I'm scared, and I want to run. And you do the same. And that way, whatever happens, we never do to each other. What he did to you, what Sarah and I did to each other, what we both almost did this week. We don't get to fade. If it ends with words out loud at this table like people, not like ghosts. Olivia's eyes filled again, but it was different this time. It wasn't grief, and it wasn't fear. That's a better promise than forever, she said softly. It's the only one I know how to keep. She reached across the table, then slowly and put her hand over his, the same hand Daniel had covered a week ago, and she'd let sit there frozen and small. Except this time, she wasn't small. This time, she chose it. And Ethan turned his hand over under hers and held on. Okay, Olivia said. Okay, we stay, we choose it, and when we want to run, we say so out loud right here. Right here, Ethan said. They sat like that for a while, hands together on the table, 2 cups cooling between them, and neither of them said much because not much needed saying. The bell over the door rang as other people came and went, and the cafe filled and emptied around them, and none of it touched the small, quiet thing being built at the corner table, the thing that had started with a wrong seat and a rainy morning, and 4 words offered to a stranger. After a long while, Olivia spoke. Claire wants to meet you properly, she said. Not curbside at an airport. She said, and I'm quoting, tell the friend with the cinnamon coffee that if he's going to keep my sister company at my table, he'd better come to dinner and pass inspection. She smiled. She's protective. Now that she's back, it's very annoying. It's the best thing in the world. I'll pass inspection. You will not. You'll tap your fingers the whole time, and she'll know you're nervous, and she'll enjoy it enormously. Then I'll tap my fingers, Ethan said, and I'll show up anyway. That's the deal now, right? Show up scared. Say it out loud. Sit in the chair even when it terrifies you. Sit in the chair even when it terrifies you, Olivia repeated, and she looked for the first time since he'd known her completely unguarded. Not the sharp version, not the small version, not the careful version. Just Olivia sitting at a table she'd once guarded out of fear, holding the hand of a man who'd once run from that same table out of the same fear, both of them choosing right now, in the plain gray light of an ordinary morning, to stay. Outside, the rain had stopped. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy doing the bravest thing either of them had done in years, which wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration or anything anyone watching would have even been able to see. It was just 2 people at a small table deciding not to leave. The dinner with Claire happened on a Thursday, and Ethan tapped his fingers on the table the entire time exactly as Olivia had predicted, and Claire enjoyed it exactly as much as she'd promised she would. He's nervous, Claire announced about 90 seconds in, delighted. Look at him. Liv, look at his hands. I told you, Olivia said. I'm sitting right here, Ethan said. We know, both sisters said at the same time, and then looked at each other and laughed, and Ethan realized that whatever inspection he was supposed to be passing, he'd probably already passed it just by showing up and being visibly terrified, because that was the thing about these 2 women they didn't trust Smooth. They'd both had Smooth. Smooth had a name, and it was Daniel, and it wore an expensive coat. What they trusted was a man who tapped his fingers and stayed anyway. Halfway through dinner, Claire got quiet, and she looked at Ethan across the table with an expression that had gone suddenly serious, the teasing set aside. Can I tell you why I came back, she said. The real reason, not the version I gave Liv at the airport. Olivia set down her fork. There's a version you didn't give me. There's always a version, Liv. Claire turned her glass slowly. I took that job across the country because I wanted to prove something, that I could do it on my own, that I didn't need anybody, that I was independent and strong and all the things you're supposed to be. She looked at her sister. And I was out there. I was successful. I was independent. And I was the loneliest I've ever been in my entire life, because I'd confused not needing anyone with not letting anyone matter. And those aren't the same thing. They're opposites, actually. I figured that out about 3,000 miles too late, sitting alone in an apartment I couldn't afford to be happy in, and I thought I have a sister who sits at a coffee shop every Friday, guarding an empty chair for me, and I'm out here pretending I don't need her, and we are both of us dying of the same stupid disease. So I quit, and I flew home, and I'm not doing that again. The pretending. I'm done. The table was quiet, and Ethan, listening, felt the last piece of something click into place in his own chest, because Claire had just named it. The disease. The exact one he'd had. The exact one Olivia had had. Confusing not needing anyone with not letting anyone matter. 3 people at one table, all of them recovering from the same illness. All of them having caught it in a different city, from a different loss. And all of them finally slowly learning the cure was the same simple, terrifying thing. Let someone matter. Sit in the chair. Stay. To sitting in the chair, Ethan said, and lifted his glass, and both sisters looked at him surprised, and then Olivia's eyes went soft with understanding, and she lifted hers. To sitting in the chair, she said. Claire looked between them, and something knowing crossed her face. Oh, she said. Oh, it's like that. It's a whole thing between you two. The chair thing. She raised her glass. Fine. To the chair. Whatever it means. I can tell it means something. It means everything, Olivia said quietly, looking at Ethan. It means absolutely everything. The months after that moved the way good months do, quietly, without any single dramatic scene, just a slow accumulation of mornings. Ethan kept his promise. It got tested. Of course it got tested. About 6 weeks in, he woke up one morning with the old machinery grinding away in his chest, that familiar cold voice telling him this was getting too real, that he should pull back, that he could feel a loss coming, and the smart move was to get ahead of it. And every instinct he had told him to go quiet, to skip the cafe, to start the slow fade the way he always had. Instead, he picked up his phone, and he typed the hardest words he'd ever typed. He wrote, I want to run today. I don't know why. Nothing happened. I just woke up scared. I'm telling you, instead of disappearing. And he hit send before he could delete it, the way he'd deleted 100 honest messages over the years. His phone rang 30 seconds later. Where are you? Olivia said. Home. Get dressed. I'm coming to get you. We're going to the cafe, and you're going to sit in the chair and be scared where I can see you, and it's going to pass because it always passes. That's the thing nobody tells you about the fear. It always passes if you don't feed it by running. A pause. You told me. You said the words. Do you have any idea how much it means that you said the words, I almost didn't? But you did. That's the whole thing, Ethan. That's the entire thing. You did. Her voice was fierce now. You have no idea. Every man in my life, when the fear came, they went quiet and made it my fault. You woke up scared, and the first thing you did was tell me. Do you understand what you just gave me? You gave me proof it's possible, that a person can be terrified and honest at the same time. I didn't know that was possible. I'm coming to get you. Sit tight. And she came, and they sat at the table, and the fear passed the way she said it would, and Ethan learned something that morning that changed the rest of his life, which was that the fear had never actually been the enemy. The running was the enemy. The fear was just weather. It came and it went. It was the running that turned weather into permanent winter. He never fully stopped being afraid. That's not how it works. Olivia never fully stopped either, but they'd made a place, the two of them, where being afraid didn't mean being alone, and where the words I want to run were met with come sit down instead of silence. And that turned out to be the whole difference between a love that fades and a love that lasts. Daniel tried once more about 4 months in. A message to Olivia, long and carefully worded, another apology that was really a hook, another gentle-sounding attempt to make her feel guilty for choosing herself. Olivia read it, and then she read it out loud to Ethan across the table, because that was the deal now. No ghosts, no secrets, everything out loud at the table. He says he's really changed this time, Olivia read. He says he's been going to therapy. He says he understands now what he did wrong, and he just wants a chance to show me the new him. She looked up. 6 months ago, this would have gotten to me. Every word of it. The therapy, the growth, the second chance. I'd have thought, what if it's real? What if I'm being cruel? What if I'm the one who's damaged? And now, Olivia set the phone down. And now I notice he wrote 3 paragraphs about how much he's changed, and not one single sentence asking how I am." She smiled, and there was no bitterness in it, just a clean, calm certainty. It's still about him. It was always about him. Even his apologies are about him. She picked the phone back up, and Ethan watched her type a single line, and then she turned the screen so he could see it before she sent it. It said, "I hope the new you is happy. He won't be with me." And then she blocked the number and she set the phone face down on the table, and she reached for her coffee like nothing had happened at all, and Ethan understood that he had just watched the final quiet end of 4 years of a woman's pain, not with a dramatic scene, but with a woman who had finally fully chosen herself. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm better than okay," Olivia said. "I just answered the question." "Which question?" "The one you asked me that first day with Daniel. Why I stopped choosing myself." She looked at him. "I just chose myself. Out loud. In one sentence. It took me 30 years, but I finally did it." Her eyes were bright. "And the strangest part is it wasn't even hard. Once you actually know your own worth, saying no to someone who doesn't see it isn't a struggle. It's just a fact, like closing a door you don't need open anymore." Olivia opened her own design studio that spring. She'd been talking about it for weeks, circling it, finding reasons it wasn't the right time, and Ethan had watched her do the thing she always did, the shrinking, the making herself small, the finding of 100 careful reasons not to want the big thing she wanted. And one morning he'd finally said, "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "The thing. The one where you talk yourself out of your own life, so you never have to risk wanting something." He'd held her eyes. "You told me you spent 4 years asking why he didn't choose you. You want to actually choose yourself. Sign the lease. Open the studio. Stop guarding empty chairs, including the one where your own dreams are supposed to sit." She'd stared at him, and then she'd signed the lease that afternoon. The studio was small, and the first months were terrifying, and there were nights she came home convinced she'd made a catastrophic mistake, and every single one of those nights Ethan sat with her and reminded her that terrified and wrong were not the same thing the way she'd once reminded him. And slowly the clients came, and then more of them. And then one day, Olivia looked around a space that was entirely her own, built by her own choices, funded by her own courage, and she realized she had built the first thing in her adult life that no man had talked her out of, and she cried, and this time they were the good kind. Ethan changed too. He'd spent a decade managing construction projects from behind a screen, a job he'd chosen precisely because it kept everyone at a comfortable distance, and somewhere in that spring, he admitted out loud at the table that he hated it. That he'd chosen it for the same reason he chose everything, because it was safe, and it didn't ask anything of him, and it never risked disappointing him. "So what do you actually want?" Olivia asked. And Ethan, who had spent years never letting himself finish that sentence, finished it. He wanted to build things with his hands, not manage other people building them from a distance, build them himself. He'd been rebuilding old motorcycles in his garage for years, the one thing that ever made him lose track of time, and he'd never once let himself imagine it could be more than a way to hide. He started a business restoring vintage bikes that fall. It was slow. It was scary. It was the first thing he'd ever chosen because he wanted it instead of because it was safe. And Olivia sat with him through every terrified night of it, exactly the way he'd sat with her, and the two of them built their separate brave things side by side. Two people who had both spent years being careful, learning together how to be bold. They were no longer two lonely people looking for somewhere to belong. That was the thing Ethan understood slowly over that long, good year. They hadn't found belonging in each other exactly. That wasn't it. That was the old story, the one where someone rescues you and completes you and fills the empty chair. What they'd actually done was harder and better. They'd each become someone who could belong to themselves and then chosen freely, without need, without rescue, to build a life together anyway. Not because either of them was incomplete, because two whole people are so much better than two halves. Claire stayed in Austin. She found work she loved closer to home, and the three of them fell into an easy rhythm, and the empty chair at the Friday table stopped being empty because Claire started filling it again every Friday morning the way she used to. Except now, sometimes Ethan was there too, and sometimes it was all three of them crowded around a table built for two, and Olivia would look around at the people she loved and think about how close she'd come to spending her whole life guarding an emptiness rather than risk filling it. One evening near the end of that first year, Ethan and Olivia went out to a different coffee shop across town, one they'd never been to, just to try something new. And they walked in, and there in the corner was a small table with an empty chair, and Olivia stopped and looked at it and started to laugh. "Should we sit there?" she asked. Ethan looked at the empty chair, and then at her, and something warm and knowing passed between them, a whole history in a glance. "Are you sure?" he said. "It might be dangerous." She laughed the full, unguarded laugh he'd fallen for somewhere along the way. "The last empty chair changed my life." They sat down together, and sitting there in the cafe that meant nothing to either of them, at a table with no history, Ethan finally understood the thing the whole year had been trying to teach him. It was never about the table. That first rainy Friday, the wrong seat, the notebook, the jacket, none of that had been the important part. He used to think it was fate that the universe had reached down and put him in exactly the right wrong chair at exactly the right moment. But that wasn't it. That wasn't it at all. The table was never the point. The coffee was never the point. The empty chair was never even the point. The point was the choice. Because 100 people had sat in 100 wrong seats that same rainy morning all over the world, and nothing had come of it because they'd apologized and moved on and gone back to their small, safe lives. What made that Friday different wasn't the seat. It was that a frightened woman had chosen to say, "You can stay," instead of "You can go." And a frightened man had chosen to stay instead of run. Not that day he'd run plenty since, but eventually finally on the morning that mattered. Every good thing in both their lives traced back, not to a lucky table, but to a series of small, terrifying choices to stay when everything in them screamed to leave. That was the whole secret. That was the thing nobody tells you. Life doesn't usually change through some enormous dramatic decision. It changes through 1,000 small ones. The choice to sit down, the choice to come back the second morning, the choice to say the words "I want to run" instead of just running, the choice to sign the lease, start the business, block the number, answer the call, stay at the table. Small choices, made scared, made anyway. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked, watching his face. "I'm thinking," Ethan said slowly, "about how a year ago I set out 2 coffee cups every morning for a woman who was never coming back and called it my life." He looked at her. "And now I'm sitting across from a woman who's actually here, and I keep waiting for the part of me that wants to run, to show up, and it's just not showing up. For the first time in as long as I can remember, there's no exit I'm eyeing. I'm just here, all the way here." Olivia reached across the table and took his hand, and his fingers weren't tapping. "Say that again," she said, the way she had once before, months ago, in another cafe at another table, when he'd said the truest thing she'd ever heard. "I'm all the way here," Ethan said. "No exit, no fade, no ghost, just me choosing this, choosing you, and choosing it again tomorrow, and the day after that, one scared, brave morning at a time, for as long as we both keep showing up." And that was the thing they'd built in the end. Not a perfect love, not a rescue, not a fairy tale about a wrong table and a lucky chair. They'd built something far more real than that. 2 people who had each spent a lifetime running from pain, who had each perfected the art of leaving before they could be left, who had somehow found each other over a stolen seat and a cinnamon coffee, and who had made together the single bravest choice either of them had ever made. They stayed. For 2 people who had spent their whole lives running, staying was not the small thing it looked like from the outside. It was the biggest thing in the world. It was the thing every good part of their lives grew out of. And they chose it not once, not in a single grand romantic moment, but every single morning at every single table for the rest of their lives. Ethan Miller had walked into a coffee shop believing that keeping things small was the safest way to live. He walked out of that year knowing the truth. The safest way to live was the loneliest way to die. And the bravest, hardest, most terrifying thing a person could ever do was also the simplest. Sit down, stay, let someone see the parts of you that you usually hide, and believe at last that you belong. Here is a reflective, philosophical closing meditation drawn from Ethan and Olivia's story, written to run about 2,000 words in the same spoken TTS-friendly style. If you've stayed with this story all the way to here, then let me sit with you for a few more minutes, because there's something underneath all of this that's worth saying plainly. Something the whole story was really about hiding behind the coffee and the wrong table and the empty chair. Here is the truth that Ethan and Olivia both had to learn the hardest possible way. Most of us don't lose love because we run out of it. We lose it because we're afraid of it. We think the great enemy of love is anger or betrayal or some dramatic explosion that tears two people apart. But that's rarely how it actually happens. Far more often, love doesn't die in a fire. It dies in the cold. It dies quietly in the slow accumulation of small retreats, in the phone calls we don't return, in the honest sentences we swallow, in the 1,000 tiny moments where we choose the safety of distance over the risk of being seen. Sarah told Ethan she felt like she was living with a ghost. She wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate. He hadn't stopped loving her. He'd just stopped showing up one careful inch at a time until there was nothing left to hold. And that's the first hard lesson buried in this story. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is protection. It's the wall we build to make sure nothing can ever hurt us the way we've been hurt before. Ethan spent 2 years believing that wall was keeping him safe. And in a narrow technical sense it was. Behind that wall, no one could leave him because he never let anyone close enough to matter. No one could disappoint him because he expected nothing. No one could break his heart because he'd locked it somewhere no one could reach, including himself. But here is what he discovered lying awake in the dark with his dog pressed against his side. A heart that can't be broken, also can't be filled. The same wall that keeps out the pain, keeps out the joy. You cannot selectively numb. When you protect yourself from loss, you are also at that exact same moment protecting yourself from love. They come through the same door. And if you bolt that door shut, you don't get a safe life, you get an empty one. That's the cruelest trick fear plays on us. It dresses itself up as wisdom. It doesn't feel like fear when you're inside it. It feels like being smart. It feels like being realistic. Ethan didn't think I'm too scared to love this woman. He thought I'm being responsible. She's just out of a bad relationship. She doesn't need my complications. The mature thing is to give her space. Fear always has good reasons. That's what makes it so dangerous. It hands you a perfectly logical explanation for why the safe, small, lonely choice is actually the noble one. And Olivia did the same thing in her own way. She didn't think I'm too scared to move forward with my life. She thought I'm honoring my sister, I'm being loyal, I'm grieving properly. She got to call her fear loyalty. He got to call his fear responsibility. And both of them for a long time were quietly dying inside a story they'd told themselves to feel better about not living. So here is the second thing this story is really about. The most important question in love is not the one we usually ask. When Olivia was drowning in her old relationship, the question that haunted her for 4 years was, why didn't he choose me? Why wasn't I enough? Why did I always come second? And those questions feel enormous when you're inside them. They feel like the whole world, but they're the wrong questions because they put your entire worth in someone else's hands. They make your value a verdict that another person gets to deliver. And Ethan saw it clearly because he could see her wound better than he could see his own. He told her, you keep asking why he didn't choose you, but the real question is why you stopped choosing yourself. That single sentence broke something open in her because it moved the vote back where it belonged. Not with Daniel, not with anyone who might one day walk into a cafe and decide whether she was worthy. With her, the only person whose vote was ever really required. And this is the piece that so many of us get backwards. We spend our lives waiting to be chosen when the real work, the harder and more important work, is learning to choose ourselves first. Not in a selfish way, not in a walls-up, need-no-one way. Claire learned that lesson too, remember? She flew across the country to prove she didn't need anybody, and she found out that not needing anyone and not letting anyone matter are the same disease wearing 2 different coats. So it's a delicate thing. Choosing yourself doesn't mean choosing to be alone. It means becoming someone who has a self-worth bringing to another person. It means refusing to disappear inside someone else's shape. It means being whole enough that when love comes, you meet it as a gift and not as a rescue. Because that's the third truth, and maybe the most important one. There's a difference between being completed by someone and being chosen by someone. The old story, the fairy tale, the one we're all raised on, says that somewhere out there is the person who will fill the empty chair, complete the missing half, make you whole. And it's a beautiful lie. It's a lie that ruins more love than almost anything else, because if you believe another person is supposed to complete you, then you'll cling to them out of need, and you'll shrink yourself to keep them, and you'll confuse desperation with devotion. That was Olivia and Daniel. She wasn't choosing him. She was clinging to him because she thought she was incomplete without him. That's not love. That's fear with a wedding ring on. What Ethan and Olivia finally built was something different and something so much harder. Two whole people who did not need each other choosing each other anyway. She didn't complete him. He didn't rescue her. They both did the terrifying work of becoming complete on their own and then standing on their own 2 feet, wanting nothing, needing nothing. They turned to each other and said, "I choose this. Not because I'm empty without you, because my life is full and I want you in it anyway." That is the only kind of love that lasts. The love that comes from fullness, not from hunger, because love born of need is really just a fear of being alone. But love born of freedom, love where you could survive without the person and choose them regardless, that's the real thing. That's the only thing. And then there is the last lesson, the quietest one, the one the whole story circles back to at the end. Love is not a feeling you fall into. It's a choice you make, and then keep making, especially when you don't feel like it. We're taught that love is something that happens to us like weather, like getting struck by lightning. And the beginning of love does feel like that, but the beginning is easy. Anyone can fall. The beginning isn't where love is won or lost. Love is decided in the 10,000 ordinary mornings that come after, in the moments when the old fear wakes up and whispers run, and you have to decide again whether to stay. Ethan made a promise to Olivia at that table, and it wasn't a promise of forever, because he'd watched forever fade twice, and he didn't trust the word. His promise was smaller and truer than forever. He promised that when he wanted to run, he would say so out loud instead of just disappearing. And that promise, that one small, honest promise, turned out to be worth more than every grand declaration in the world, because it meant they would never fade. It meant if it ever ended, it would end with words at the table like people, and not with two ghosts quietly agreeing to disappear. That's the whole secret if there is one. Love doesn't survive on passion. Passion is the spark, not the fire. Love survives on the daily decision to stay honest and to stay present, to keep showing up scared, to say the hard, true thing instead of going silent. The morning Ethan woke up terrified and texted her, "I want to run," instead of vanishing that unremarkable little moment that was the moment their love actually became unbreakable. Not the meeting, not the first coffee. Not any of the sweet parts. It was the moment fear came and he chose honesty over hiding. Because a love where you can say "I'm scared" and be met with "come sit down" instead of silence, that's a love that has nowhere left to break. So if you take anything from this story, from Ethan and Olivia and the wrong table and the empty chair, let it be this. The empty chair in your own life, whatever it is, the risk you keep not taking the love, you keep protecting yourself from the dream, you keep guarding instead of living the honest sentence, you keep swallowing that chair is not keeping you safe. It only feels like it is. Fear will always tell you the wall is protecting you, right up until the day you realize the wall was the thing hurting you all along. The small, careful, protected life is not the safe one. It's the loneliest way there is to slowly disappear. The bravest thing a person can do is not some grand gesture. It's quieter than that and harder than that. It's to sit down when everything in you says run. To stay when leaving would be easier. To let another person see the parts of you that you usually hide, knowing they could hurt you and choosing to be seen anyway. To believe after everything, after every loss, after every reason the world has given you, not to that you still belong at the table. Because in the end, life doesn't change through the enormous decisions we agonize over. It changes through the small ones we almost don't make. It changes the moment you sit somewhere you weren't supposed to be, and someone looks at you, and instead of telling you to leave, they say the 4 words that can change everything. You can stay. And you finally at long last believe them.